The cold metal floor of the Zephrian ship vibrated softly as Commander Vexel walked through the cargo bay. His long, purple fingers touched the surface of the strange pod they had found floating in space 3 days ago. The thing was old. Very old, but somehow it still worked perfectly. Dr. Kellenor stood beside him, her 4 eyes studying the readings on her scanner. She was the best scientist on the ship, and even she looked confused. "Commander, this machine is over 300 years old. But look at these numbers. Everything inside is still alive." Vexel leaned closer to the pod. Through the thick glass window, he could see a face. It looked almost like a Zephrian face, but different. The skin was pale pink instead of purple. The creature had only 2 eyes instead of 4, mitted head. Hair on top of its head, something no civilized species had. "What do you think it is?" Kellenor touched the pod with her tentacles. The surface was smooth and covered with strange marks. Their computer had been trying to translate the writing for days. Finally, yesterday, it had figured out what the marks meant. The writing says his name is Jake Morrison. It says he was a lieutenant in something called the United Earth Defense Force. His number was 2847 Deltanine Earth. Vexel had heard that name before in old stories. Earth was supposed to be the home world of humans, but humans were just myths, stories told to children. Everyone knew humans had died out long ago in some terrible war. "Are you sure this is real?" Vexel asked. "Very sure," Kellenor said. "My scans show he has 2 hearts, just like the old stories say humans had. His blood is red, not blue like ours. And look at this." She pointed to her scanner. "His brain patterns are completely different from any species we know." Chief Security. Officer Thandak walked into the cargo bay. He was bigger than the other Zephrians, with thick arms and a deep voice. He did not look happy. "Commander, I do not like this," he said. "We do not know what this creature is. We do not know if it is dangerous. We should leave it where we found it." Vexel shook his head. "If this really is a human, it could be the greatest discovery in our history. Think about what we could learn. Think about what could go wrong," Thandak said back. But Vexel had already made up his mind. He was a scientist first, and this was too important to ignore. Dr. Kellenor began the revival process. "But be careful. We do not know what condition he will be in after so long." Kellenor nodded and began touching buttons on the pod. Slowly, the machine started to hum. Lights began flashing. The temperature inside started to rise. It took 6 hours. The other crew members gathered around to watch. They had never seen anything like this before. As the ice melted away, they could see the creature more clearly. He was tall, maybe 6 feet. His body looked strong, with muscles under his strange clothing. Wore what looked like a uniform, dark green with patches on the shoulders. "His heart rate is increasing," Kellenor said, watching her instruments. "Brain activity is returning to normal levels. I think he is waking up." The creature's eyes moved under his closed eyelids. His chest began moving up and down more quickly. Then, suddenly, his eyes opened. They were blue. Bright blue like the sky on Zephyr Prime. For a moment, he just stared at the ceiling. Then his head turned, and he saw the aliens standing around him. Most creatures would have screamed. Most would have been afraid. But Jake Morrison did not scream. He did not look afraid. Instead, he sat up slowly and looked at each of them carefully. His eyes moved from face to face, taking in everything. "What's the tactical situation?" he asked. His voice was calm and steady. The universal translator worked quickly, changing his words into Zephrian language. But the meaning was clear enough. This creature, this human, was asking about battle conditions. "There is no battle," Vexel said quickly. "You are safe. We found you in space and brought you aboard our ship. My name is Commander Vexel," says Dr. Kellenor and Chief Security Officer Thandak. Jake looked at each of them again. Time Vexel noticed that his eyes seemed to study everything. The human looked at their weapons, at the exits, at the way they stood. It was like he was taking notes in his head. "How long was I out?" Jake asked. "According to our scans, you have been in that pod for over 300 years, Kellenor said. Jake's face did not change, just nodded like this was normal information. What year is it? By your calendar, it would be the year 2387, Kellinor said. And Earth. The aliens looked at each other. Vexel spoke carefully. We're sorry to tell you this, but according to our records, Earth was destroyed in a great war over 200 years ago. Humans are extinct. You may be the last one alive. For the first time, Jake's face showed emotion. But it was not sadness or fear. It was something else. Something that made Thandok step backward without thinking. Extinct? Jake repeated. That's what they want everyone to think. Vexel asked. But Jake was already standing up. He moved smoothly, like a machine. The aliens could see that despite being frozen for 3 centuries, his body was still strong. Very strong. Who are you people? Jake asked. What species? We are Zephronians, Vexel said. We come from the Zephron collective. We are explorers and scientists. We travel through space looking for new knowledge and new friends. Zephron collective, Jake repeated. How many worlds do you control? Control is not the right word, Vexel said quickly. We do not control worlds. We help them. We bring peace and prosperity through trade and cooperation. 17 systems are part of our collective now. Jake nodded slowly. 17 systems? That's a good-sized territory. Something about the way he said it made Thandok's hand move toward his weapon, but Jake saw the movement and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Relax, Chief, Jake said. I'm not going anywhere. I'm grateful that you saved me. Really? But his eyes kept moving, kept studying, kept taking notes. And when Dr. Kellinor offered to show him 2 quarters where he could rest and recover, Jake accepted politely. That would be great, he said. I'd love to learn more about your peaceful collective. It sounds very interesting. As they walked through the corridors of the ship, Jake asked questions, simple questions about the ship, about the crew, about their technology. Friendly questions from a grateful survivor. But Thandok noticed that Jake's questions were the kind that a soldier would ask. Questions about security, about weapons, about how many people were on the ship and where they slept. That night, after Jake had been given food and clothing and a comfortable room, the senior officers met in private. I do not trust him, Thandok said immediately. He is just curious, Kellinor said. After 300 years, of course, he wants to know about the world. And he has been very polite. Too polite, Thandok said. And did you see how he moved? How he watched us? The creature is a warrior, I can feel it. Even if he is, Vexel said, what can one human do against our entire ship? Besides, think of what we can learn from him. He is living history. But in his quarters, Jake was not sleeping. He was thinking. He was remembering his last day on Earth when the enemy ships filled the sky. He remembered Captain Rodriguez's final orders: scatter and survive, find the enemy, make them pay. He had been frozen with a mission. And now, 300 years later, these aliens had given him the perfect opportunity to complete it. They thought humans were extinct. They thought he was the last one. They thought he was grateful and harmless. They were wrong about everything. Jake Morrison was exactly where he needed to be. And tomorrow, he would begin to show them what one human soldier could do. Jake Morrison woke up at exactly 5 in the morning. His body clock still worked perfectly after 300 years of sleep. He did 50 push-ups and 50 sit-ups in his small room, moving quietly so the aliens would not hear him. The Zephronians had given him simple clothes to wear, gray pants and a gray shirt that felt soft against his skin. But Jake missed his uniform. He missed the weight of his weapons and equipment. Most of all, he missed knowing where he was in the chain of command. Dr. Kellinor came to see him after breakfast. She brought a small device that could record his voice and translate his words into their language. She wanted to interview him about human history and culture. Tell me about Earth, she said, settling into a chair across from him. Her 4 eyes looked excited and curious. What was it like before the war? Jake had spent most of the night thinking about this question. Captain Rodriguez had taught him about information warfare. Never give the enemy the whole truth. Always make them think they know more than they do. Earth was beautiful, Jake said, looking sad. We had blue oceans and green forests. Cities with millions of people living peacefully together. We loved art and music and science. But then you had wars, Kellanor said. Yes, Jake nodded. Humans were not very good at getting along with each other. We fought over resources, over land, over ideas. In the end, we destroyed ourselves. This was partly true. Humans did fight wars with each other. But Jake did not mention that they also fought wars with aliens, wars that the galaxy seemed to have forgotten about. How sad, Kellanor said. Got it. If only your species had learned to live in peace like we have. Tell me about your peace, Jake said. What does the Zephron collective work? Kellanor smiled with all four eyes. We bring civilization to primitive worlds. When we find a new species, we teach them about trade and cooperation. We show them how to live without violence. Most species are very grateful. Most species, well, some need more time to understand. Some are stubborn and want to keep their old ways. But eventually, they all see that our way is better. Jake nodded and asked more questions. Simple questions about how the collective operated. How they dealt with species that did not want to join. How they maintained order across 17 star systems. The more Kellanor talked, the clearer the picture became. The Zephron collective was not as peaceful as they claimed. They were conquerors, but they used soft words to describe their conquest. They called invasion integration. They called occupation cooperation. They called slavery voluntary labor programs. But they had convinced themselves that they were the good guys. That made them dangerous in a different way than an honest enemy. After Kellanor left, Jake was allowed to walk around the ship. Commander Vexel had assigned a young Zephorian named Peltok to show him around. Peltok was friendly and eager to please. He was also very talkative. This is the engineering section, Peltok said as they walked through a corridor lined with humming machines. We have the most advanced engines in this sector of space. Can travel faster than any other species. Jake looked at the machines with interest. They were advanced, but he could see weaknesses. The power systems were not well protected. A small explosion in the right place could disable the whole ship. How many people work down here? Jake asked. Only 6 during the day shift, Peltok said. 3 at night. The computers do most of the work. Jake made a mental note. 6 people during the day, 3 at night. No guards that he could see. They visited the bridge next. Commander Vexel was there, talking to his officers about their next destination. The bridge was large and open, with big windows that showed the stars outside. Ow! The control stations were arranged in a circle around the commander's chair. This is where we make all our decisions, Peltok said proudly. Commander Vexel is very wise. He's brought 12 new worlds into our collective. 12 worlds, Jake repeated. Impressive. Counted 7 crew members on the bridge. Their weapons were small energy pistols that hung from their belts. They did not look like they knew how to use them properly. Their stance was all wrong. Their hand positions were casual, not ready for quick draw. These people had never been in a real fight. They visited the crew quarters next. Jake learned that there were 43 Zephirians on the ship. Most of them were scientists and technicians. Only 5 were security officers, including Chief Thandok. Do you ever have trouble with pirates or raiders? Jake asked as they walked past the security office. Not really, Peltok said. Most species in this area are civilized now, and our ships are very fast. We can usually outrun any trouble. What if you can't run? Peltok looked confused by the question. Why would we not be able to run? Jake smiled. These people really had no idea what war looked like. That evening, Jake was invited to eat dinner with the senior officers. The food was strange but tasty, reminded him of vegetables from Earth, but with different colors and textures. How are you adjusting to life on our ship? Commander Vexel asked. Very well, thank you, Jake said. Everyone has been very kind. I'm grateful for your hospitality. It must be difficult, being the last of your kind, Dr. Kellanor said softly. Jake looked down at his plate. It is, but I try to focus on learning about this new galaxy. so much I don't understand. What would you like to know? Vexel asked. Well, Jake said carefully, Dr. Kellner mentioned that some species are stubborn about joining the collective. What happens to them? We are very patient, Vexel said. We provide them with examples of how much better life can be under our system. We offer trade agreements and technology exchanges. Eventually, they see the benefits. But what if they don't want those benefits? Vexel and Kellenor exchanged glances. That rarely happens, Vexel said. When a species sees how peaceful and prosperous our member worlds are, they usually want to join. Usually. There have been a few exceptions, Chief Thandok said. Way's voice was harder than the others. Some species are too primitive to understand. Civilization. In those cases, we have to make decisions for them. What kind of decisions? We relocate their populations to worlds where they can be better educated, Kellenor said quickly. We provide them with jobs and housing and medical care. It's really quite generous. Jake nodded like he understood, but he was thinking about something else. In his time, they had a word for relocating populations against their will. They called it ethnic cleansing. You mentioned jobs, Jake said. What kind of work do these relocated populations do? Mining mostly, Vexel said. Agricultural work, manufacturing, simple tasks that help support the collective, and they're happy with this work, of course, Kellenor said. They have food and shelter and safety. What more could they want? Jake could think of several things. Starting with freedom, but he just smiled and nodded. After dinner, he walked back to his quarters slowly. The ship's corridors were quiet at night. Only a few crew members were on duty. The security stations were unmanned except for one guard. In the main corridor, Jake had been a soldier for 15 years before he was frozen. He had served under some of the best officers in the Earth's Defense Force. Captain Rodriguez had taught him about reconnaissance. Major Collins had taught him about infiltration. Colonel Harper had taught him about psychological warfare. But it was General Sullivan who had taught him the most important lesson of all. Never underestimate your enemy. Jake, but don't make the mistake of overestimating them either. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't know they're in a fight. The Zephrians had no idea they were in a fight. They thought Jake was a harmless survivor from a dead species. They thought he was grateful for their kindness. They thought he was adjusting well to his new life. They were wrong about everything. Jake had been listening carefully to everything they said. He had been watching their routines, their security procedures, their weaknesses, and he had learned something very important. The Zephrian collective was built on a lie. They were not peaceful explorers. They were conquerors who had convinced themselves they were heroes. They had been enslaving species for centuries, but they called it integration and cooperation. That meant there were probably human survivors scattered throughout their territory, humans who were being used as voluntary laborers in mines and factories, humans who had been relocated and educated and turned into slaves. His mission was becoming clearer. Captain Rodriguez had told him to find the enemy and make them pay. The enemy was right here, feeding him dinner and treating him like a guest. And they had just told him exactly where to find the rest of his people, Jake. Morrison smiled as he lay down on his bed. Tomorrow, he would continue playing the role of the grateful survivor. He would ask more innocent questions and learn more about their operations. But soon, very soon, he would show them what one human soldier could do when he had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The Zephrians thought they had found a relic from a dead civilization. They were about to learn they had awakened something much more dangerous. Jake had been awake on the Zephrian ship for 6 days now. Every morning, he did his exercises. Every day, he smiled and asked polite questions. Every evening, he ate dinner with the officers and pretended to be grateful. But at night, when the ship was quiet, Jake moved through the corridors like a shadow. The Zephrians had the worst security he had ever seen. They had cameras, but they were easy to avoid. They had sensors, but they only watched for people who were not supposed to. Beyond the ship. Since Jake was a guest, the computers ignored him completely. On his third night of exploring, Jake found what he was looking for. The ship's computer center was protected by a simple lock that took him less than 2 minutes to break. He found files on everything the Zephrian collective had done for the past 50 years. The truth was worse than he had imagined. The collective had 17 star systems under their control. In those systems lived over 40 different species. Most of them had been integrated against their will. Populations had been broken up and moved to different worlds. Their leaders had been removed and replaced with Zephron governors, and scattered throughout the collective's territory were humans.
Thousands of them.
Maybe tens of thousands. The files called them Species 23. They were described as primitive but useful for manual labor. They were working in mines on Kepler 7. They were farming on agricultural worlds in the Vega system. They were building roads and factories on newly integrated planets. They were slaves. And they did not even know their real names anymore. Jake read report after report. Human children were taken from their parents at age 5 and put in education centers. They were taught that they were lucky to be part of the collective. They were taught that their ancestors had been violent and primitive. They were taught to be grateful for the opportunity to serve, but some files were different. Security reports about humans who caused trouble, humans who asked too many questions, humans who tried to organize other workers. These humans disappeared. The reports said they were relocated for advanced training. Jake knew what that meant. They were killed. He downloaded everything onto a small storage device he had built from spare parts in his room. And he carefully covered his tracks and returned to his quarters. But he did not sleep, planned. The next morning, Dr. Kellner came for their daily interview. She wanted to record more stories about human culture. Jake had been telling her about Earth's history, but always with a focus on how humans had destroyed themselves through violence. "Tell me about human families," she said, settling into her chair. "Families were very important to us," Jake said. "Parents loved their children deeply. They would do anything to protect them." "How sad that such strong family bonds led to so much conflict," Kellner said. "Yes," Jake agreed. "Human parents often fought to keep their children safe." They did not understand that sometimes separation was necessary for the greater good. Kellner nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. That is why our integration policies work so well. We remove children from potentially harmful environments and give them proper education." Jake kept his face calm, but inside he was burning with rage. This alien was talking about stealing children like it was a good thing. She was proud of it. "That's very wise," he said. "I'm sure those children grow up to be grateful for the opportunities you give them." "Oh, they do," Kellner said. "We have wonderful success stories. Many of our best workers are second or third generation integrations. They're completely loyal to the collective." Jake nodded and smiled. He asked a few more questions about the integration process. Then he excused himself, saying he was tired and needed to rest, but he did not rest. He went to the ship's communication center. The Zephrons trusted him completely now. They'd given him access to most areas of the ship. The communication center had a simple lock that he opened with tools he had made from his dinner utensils. Inside, Jake found exactly what he needed. The ship had powerful transmitters that could reach across the galaxy. More importantly, it had access to the collective's entire communication network. Jake began broadcasting on old Earth Defense Force frequencies. He used codes that had been classified for 300 years. Codes that only human military personnel would know. "This is Lieutenant Jake Morrison, serial number 2847 Deltanine," he transmitted. "If anyone is receiving this, respond immediately. Repeat, this is Lieutenant Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. Any human personnel, please respond." He waited. For 10 minutes, there was only static. Then suddenly, his earpiece crackled with a voice. "Morrison, this is Captain Ryan Tucker." "Where the hell have you been, soldier?" Jake's heart jumped. Another human voice. Another survivor. "I've been on ice for 300 years, Captain. Just woke up 6 days ago." "What's your status?" "I'm commanding a small fleet in the Kepler asteroid belt. We've got about 200 people here, mostly military personnel and their families. We've been hiding from the collective for decades." More voices joined the conversation. Major Alina Santos from an industrial world, Captain Amy Collins from a mining station, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Newman from the Outer Rim. Each voice brought the same message. Humans were scattered throughout collective space. Most were slaves who did not even know their own history. But some had escaped. Some have been fighting a quiet war for generations. How many of us are there? Jake asked. Hard to say, Captain Tucker replied. Maybe 50,000 free humans. Maybe more. But there are hundreds of thousands in the labor camps. Maybe millions? In command structure? General Sullivan is still alive, Tucker said. She's been building a resistance network for the past century, but we've been waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake felt a surge of hope. General Kate Sullivan had been a legend even in his time. She was still alive, still fighting. Then there was hope. I need to make contact with the general, Jake said. That's going to be difficult, Tucker replied. Collective monitors all communication. How are you transmitting without being detected? Jake looked around the communication center. I'm on a collective ship. They think I'm their guest. Their da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Was silence for a moment. Then Tucker's voice came back, filled with amazement. You're inside their network. Yes. And I have intelligence on all their operations. Troop positions, slave camps, everything. Morrison, you beautiful bastard, Tucker said. You just gave us the break we've been waiting for. Just spent the next hour downloading everything he had learned to the Resistance Network. Locations of human settlements, guard rotations at the camps, transportation schedules, weak points in the collective's defenses. But as he worked, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps, security boots. Jake quickly shut down the transmission and hid his equipment, but it was too late. The door opened and Chief Thandok stepped inside, followed by 2 security guards. Lieutenant Morrison, Thandok said. His voice was cold and suspicious. What are you doing here? Jake stood up slowly. I couldn't sleep. I was curious about your communication systems. Dr. Kellinor said it was okay for me to explore the ship.
Doctor.
Kellinor did not mention the communication center, Thandok said. He looked at the equipment Jake had been using. These systems were active. Who were you talking to? Jake shrugged. No one. I was just trying to figure out how they worked. I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to touch anything. Thandok was not convinced. He had always been suspicious of Jake. Now his suspicions were confirmed. I think you are lying, he said. I think you are not what you pretend to be. I don't know what you mean, Jake said. But Thandok was already reaching for his weapon. I think you are dangerous. I think we made a mistake bringing you aboard. Jake sighed. He had hoped to maintain his cover for a few more days, but sometimes plans changed. You're right, he said. You did make a mistake. Thandok's hand was halfway to his gun when Jake moved. 15 years of military training kicked in. Jake had been taught to fight aliens, creatures with different anatomy and different strengths. Thandok was big and strong, but he was also slow and untrained. Jake's first strike hit Thandok in the throat, cutting off his ability to call for help. His second strike broke the alien's wrist, making him drop his weapon. The third strike put him unconscious on the floor. The 2 guards tried to react, but they were even slower than their chief. Jake disabled them both in less than 10 seconds. He dragged the unconscious aliens into a storage closet and locked the door. Then he collected their weapons and equipment. The energy pistols were crude compared to human weapons, but they would work. Jake walked quickly through the ship's corridors. It was late at night, and most of the crew was asleep. The few aliens he encountered were surprised to see him, but not alarmed. After all, he was their guest. He made his way to the bridge. The night shift was small, just 3 officers monitoring the ship's systems. They looked up when he entered. Lieutenant Morrison, one of them said. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Jake said. Then he drew his weapon. But I need you to step away from the controls. The alien stared at him in shock. They could not understand what was happening. Their guest, their harmless rescued survivor, was pointing a gun at them. Please do not make this difficult, Jake said. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will if I have to. Jake stood on the bridge of the captured Zephron ship, watching the stars outside the windows. It had been 3 hours since he took control. The alien crew was locked in the cargo bay, confused and frightened. Commander Vexel kept asking questions that Jake did not answer. The communication console was busy with messages from across the galaxy. Human voices speaking in codes that had been hidden for centuries. Jake had started something that could not be stopped. "Colonel Morrison, this is Captain Tucker," came a voice through the speakers. "We've secured the supply depot at Kepler 7. Minimal resistance." The guards surrendered when they saw us coming. "Good work, Captain," Jake replied. "What about the human workers?" "They're confused, sir. Most of them don't even remember being human. They've been calling themselves Species 23 for so long, they forgot their real names. But we're working on it." More reports came in. Major Santos had taken control of 3 industrial worlds. The Zephron administrators had fled without fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Newman's forces had captured the asteroid mining stations. Everywhere, human slaves were learning the truth about their history. But the most important message came at dawn.
"Ow."
"Jake Morrison, you son of a gun." The voice was older, but still strong. "Still commanding? This is General Kate Sullivan. I hear you've been busy." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. General Sullivan had been his hero when he was young. She had commanded the defense of Earth during the final invasion. Everyone thought she had died when the planet fell. "General Sullivan," Jake said. "It's an honor, ma'am. I thought you were dead." "I've been dead for 300 years, according to the official records," Sullivan replied. Turns out that was very useful. "For building a resistance movement. Now, give me a full report on your situation." Jake told her everything. About being found by the Zephrons. About learning the truth of their so-called peaceful integration. About the thousands of humans scattered across their territory. "Outstanding work," Colonel Sullivan said when he finished. "You've given us exactly what we needed. It's a chance to hit them before they know what's happening." "What are your orders, General?" "First, I'm promoting you to full colonel. You've earned. It's second, I need you to access that ship's navigation computer. I want to know the location of every collective facility in your sector." Jake turned to Dr. Kellenor, who was sitting quietly in a corner of the bridge. "Doctor, I need you to help me access your navigation system." "I will not help you destroy everything we've built," she said. Dr. Jake said patiently, "You have 2 choices. You can help me voluntarily, or I can figure it out myself while your people stay locked in that cargo bay without food or water. Your choice." Leonard looked at Commander Vexel, who nodded sadly. She walked to the navigation console and entered her access codes. The star map that appeared showed the true extent of the Zephron collective. 17 star systems, connected by trade routes and communication networks. But more importantly, it showed the locations of every human settlement, every labor camp, every prison facility. "General Sullivan, I'm uploading the complete tactical picture to you now," Jake said. "Received and confirmed," Sullivan replied. "Jake, what you're looking at represents 3 centuries of careful planning. We've been preparing for this day. Since Earth fell, we have assets positioned throughout collective space. Sleeper agents in key positions, hidden weapons, caches, sympathizers among other enslaved species. How many people are we talking about, General? Active resistance fighters? About 10,000. But if we can wake up the slave populations and arm them, we're looking at maybe 500,000 people ready to fight for their freedom." Jake studied the star map. The collective controlled a huge area of space, but their forces were spread thin. Most of their ships were designed for exploration and trade, not combat. Their security forces were used to dealing with individual troublemakers, not organized military resistance. "What's the plan, General?" "Phase 1 is already underway. Your signal started simultaneous uprisings across 12 systems. We're targeting supply lines, communication hubs, and administrative centers. The goal is to create chaos and cut off their ability to coordinate." Reports kept coming in as Sullivan spoke. Captain Rodriguez's daughter, now Major Rodriguez, had taken control of the main communication relay at Alpha Centauri. The collective could no longer send messages between their core systems. Captain Collins's son, now Colonel Collins, destroyed the central computer facility that managed their slave labor assignments. "Phase 2 begins in 6 hours, Sullivan continued. "We're going to liberate the major population centers. I need you to take your ship to the Vega system. There's an agricultural world there with about 50,000 human workers. Most of them don't know they're human anymore." "Understood, General." What about resistance? Minimal. The collective never expected organized opposition. Their security. Forces are designed to handle individual escapes, not military assaults. But Jake, remember something important. These people you're going to liberate have been brainwashed for generations. They think they're happy. They think the collective saved them from their primitive ancestors. Jake nodded. This would be the hardest part. Fighting an enemy was easy. Convincing victims that they were victims was much more difficult. I'll handle it, General. I know you will. One more thing, Jake. We've been in contact with other species that the collective has enslaved. The Rigelians, the Tausetians, the Proxima colonists. They're ready to rise up too. This isn't just about humans anymore. This is about freedom for everyone. The transmission ended, and Jake began plotting a course to the Vega system. Commander Vexel watched him work. You cannot succeed, the Zephron said quietly. The collective is too large, too well established. Even if you free some slaves, we will rebuild. We will adapt. Jake looked at him with cold eyes. Commander, let me explain something about humans that you never understood. We don't fight wars to win territory or resources. We fight wars to protect our families. And you made the mistake of scattered our families across the galaxy. But we gave them better lives, Vexel protested. Food, shelter, medical care, education. You gave them slavery and called it freedom, Jake replied. You stole their children and called it education. You destroyed their cultures and called it integration. And now you're going to pay for it. The journey to Vega took 18 hours. During that time, Jake listened to reports from across the galaxy. The uprising was spreading faster than anyone had expected. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were rising up. The collective's carefully maintained peace was falling apart. On the agricultural world of Vega 350,000, humans worked in vast farming complexes. They grew food that fed the entire collective. They lived in dormitories, worked 12-hour shifts, and spent their free time in education centers. Learning about the benefits of integration, they had been doing this for so long that they could not imagine any other life. Jake's ship appeared in orbit without warning. The planetary administrators tried to call for help, but their communications had been cut. They tried to launch their small defense fleet, but Jake disabled their ships. With precision strikes that caused no casualties, then he began broadcasting to the planet's surface. Attention, people of Vega 3. His voice carried across every communication device on the planet. My name is Colonel Jake Morrison. I am a human being, just like you, and I'm here to take you home. The response from the surface was confusion and fear. The administrators told the workers that this was a terrorist attack, that the speaker was lying, that they should remain calm and continue working. But Jake had prepared for this. He had recorded messages from the humans he had already liberated. Voices of people who had remembered their real names, their real families, their real history. My name is not Worker 457, said one voice. My name is David Chen. I have a daughter. Her name is Lisa. The collective took her from me when she was 5 years old. But I never forgot her. I am not Production Unit 23B, said another voice. I am Maria Santos. I remember my grandmother's songs. Remember the taste of real chocolate. Remember what it felt like to be free. One by one, the voices told their stories. Stories of families torn apart. Stories of cultures destroyed. Stories of people who had been made to forget who they were. On the surface of Vega 3, workers began to stop what they were doing. They began to listen. They began to remember in the main dormitory complex. A woman named Worker 234 suddenly sat down and began to cry. She remembered something. A name, Sarah. Her name was Sarah Lewis. She had a brother named Tom. Where was Tom? In the Eastern Farming District, a man called Unit 456 dropped his tools and stared at the sky. His name was Robert Kim. He had been a teacher before the integration. He had taught children about history and science and art. What had happened to those children? Across the planet, 50,000 people began to wake up from a dream that had lasted for generations. They began to remember who they really were. The administrators tried to maintain order. They brought out security forces. They threatened punishment for anyone who stopped working. But their security forces were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and many of the security officers were starting to remember things too. Jake's ship landed in the main plaza of the planetary capital. The war lasted exactly 6 months and 12 days. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the recaptured Earth Defense Force cruiser New Horizon, watching the final Zephron fleet surrender in the space above Earth. The planet below was still, scarred from the ancient battles, but it was home again. General Kate Sullivan stood beside him, older now but still commanding. She had led the human forces through the fastest military campaign in galactic history. The Zephron Collective, which had controlled 17 star systems for 3 centuries, had collapsed in less than 7 months. "Final report," Colonel Sullivan said. Jake read from his tablet. "The last collective fleet has surrendered. Admiral Vexel has agreed to unconditional terms. All human populations have been liberated. Enslaved species from 47 different worlds are now free. Casualties? It's on our side, less than 300 dead. Most of those were from accidents, not combat. Enemy casualties were under 5,000, mostly from their attempts to flee." Sullivan nodded. The numbers told the real story of the war. The Zephronians had built their empire on the assumption that conquered peoples would stay conquered. They had never prepared for real resistance. When 500,000 humans rose up simultaneously across their territory, the collective's security forces were overwhelmed in hours. When other enslaved species joined the rebellion, the collectives, governments simply collapsed. Their leaders fled to the core worlds, abandoning their outer territories without a fight. "What about their military response?" Sullivan asked. "What military response?" Jake replied. "They sent exploration ships with science crews to fight battle-hardened veterans. Their largest warship had a crew of 200 researchers. Our smallest fighter squadron had more combat experience than their entire navy." The truth was even worse than Jake's summary suggested. The Zephron Collective had been at peace for so long that they had forgotten how to wage war. Their ships were designed for exploration and trade. Their weapons were meant for crowd control, not ship-to-ship combat. Their officers were scientists and diplomats, not soldiers. When Captain Ryan Tucker's raiders attacked their supply lines, the Zephronians had no idea how to respond. They sent messages asking for negotiations. They offered trade agreements and cultural exchanges. They seemed to think the uprising was some kind of misunderstanding that could be solved with better communication, Major. Alina Santos had liberated entire worlds without firing a shot. The Zephron administrators simply packed up and left. When they saw her ships approaching, they could not comprehend that their former slaves actually wanted to fight them. The only real battle of the war had been at Alpha Centauri, where the collective made their last stand. Even then, it was more of a rout than a battle. The Zephron defenders surrendered after 20 minutes of combat. "Have you decided what to do with the prisoners?" Sullivan asked. Jake looked down at the planet where thousands of Zephron citizens were being held in comfortable detention camps. Commander Vexel was among them, along with Dr. Kellenor and most of the crew from the ship where Jake had been found. "I've been thinking about that," Jake said. "The easy thing would be to treat them the way they treated us. Break up their families. Send them to work camps. Tell them it's for their own good. But that would make us no better than them. Besides, most of them honestly believed they were helping people. They convinced themselves that slavery was freedom, that conquest was cooperation. They're not evil, General. They're just wrong." Sullivan smiled. "You've learned a lot in the past year, Jake." It was true. Jake had changed during the war. He had started as a soldier, focused on revenge. But liberating the human populations had taught him something important. Most of the Zephronians were not monsters. They were ordinary people who had been raised in a system that taught them to justify terrible things. "What's your recommendation?" Sullivan asked. "Send them home," Jake said. "All of them. Let them go back to their core worlds and think about what they've done, but make it clear that if they ever try to enslave another species, we'll be waiting." Sullivan nodded. I agree. But we need to make sure they understand the consequences of their actions. The peace negotiations took place on Earth, in the ruins of the old United Nations building. Jake was part of the human delegation, along with General Sullivan and representatives from all the liberated species. Admiral Vexel led the Zephron delegation. He looked older and sadder than when Jake had first met him. The confident explorer who had found Jake's pod was gone, replaced by a broken leader who had watched his entire civilization crumble. We want to understand, Vexel said during one of the sessions. We brought peace to the galaxy. We ended wars. We provided prosperity and security. Why did you choose violence over cooperation? Jake looked at him across the table. Amro, let me ask you a question. Would you be happy if someone took away your children and told you it was for their own good? But we gave them better lives, Vexel protested. Education, healthcare, purpose. We gave them slavery, said Maria Santos, one of the liberated humans from Vega 3. You can call it whatever you want, but we were slaves. Dr. Kellner, who was also part of the delegation, looked confused. But the integration studies showed that populations were healthier and more productive after joining the collective. Because you only measured the things you cared about, Jake replied. You measured production numbers and health statistics. You never measured happiness. You never measured freedom. You never asked people if they wanted to be integrated. The negotiations continued for weeks. Slowly, painfully, the Zephrians began to understand what they had really done. They had convinced themselves that they were bringing civilization. Two primitive species. They had never considered that those species might have their own civilizations, their own values, their own right to choose their own paths. The final treaty was signed on the anniversary of Jake's awakening. The Zephrian collective agreed to withdraw to their core systems and pay reparations to the species they had enslaved. They would be monitored by an international peacekeeping force, led by humans and staffed by representatives from all the liberated worlds. But the most important part of the treaty was the new law that Jake had insisted on. Any species that tried to enslave another would face immediate military intervention from the human coalition. The galaxy would never again be allowed to forget what slavery looked like, no matter what pretty words were used to describe it. After the signing ceremony, Jake walked through the ruins of New York City with Commander Vexel, the Zephrian. The leader was being released the next day, along with all the other prisoners. I still do not understand, Vexel said. Your species is capable of such violence, such destruction. How can you claim to be more civilized than us? Jake stopped walking and looked at the alien. We don't claim to be more civilized, Commander. We just claim to be more honest about what we are. What do you mean? Right. You convinced yourselves that conquest was cooperation, that slavery was integration, that breaking up families was education. You built an empire on lies and called it peace. Jake gestured at the ruined city around them. We know what we're capable of. We know we can be violent and destructive and cruel. That's exactly why we fight so hard to protect our freedom, because we know what happens when good people do nothing. While evil spreads, Vexel was quiet for a long moment. And what will you do now? Will you build your own empire? No, Jake said firmly. We're going to go home. We're going to rebuild our families and our communities. We're going to remember who we are and make sure we never forget again. And if another species tries to enslave others, Jake's expression hardened. Then we'll do what we've always done, Commander. We'll fight. And we'll keep fighting until every thinking being in the galaxy has the right to choose their own destiny. The next morning, Jake stood on the observation deck of the New Horizon as the last Zephrian transport ships departed from Earth's orbit. They were going home to a very different galaxy than the one they had left. Their empire was gone. Their certainty was shattered. Their comfortable lies had been exposed. General Sullivan joined him at the window. Any regrets, Colonel? Jake thought. About the question. 6 months ago, he had been a frozen soldier from a dead civilization. Now, he was a colonel in the human military, a liberator of enslaved peoples, and one of the architects of galactic freedom. Just one, he said finally. What? that I regret that it took us 300 years to fight back. Imagine how many people we could have saved if we'd acted sooner. Sullivan put her hand on his shoulder. Jake, sometimes the most important lesson isn't about what we could have done differently. Sometimes it's about what we'll do better next. Time, Jake nodded. The Zephyrians had made the fundamental error of assuming that humans were extinct. Then they had made the even bigger error of assuming that human restraint meant human weakness. They had found a frozen soldier and thought they had discovered a relic from a dead civilization. Instead, they had awakened the conscience of the galaxy. The war was over, the slaves were free, and the universe had learned a lesson that would not be forgotten for a very long time. Never underestimate the power of a human being who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for.